Is it getting pretty close to Portland now? God damn it. There's... Yes. I think it's improving. Ready? Yeah. It's it's better. I can pretty much use it. Just can't hold anything. Mountain bike accident. Yeah. Okay, I'll play a quick song and then we can all talk. I'll like give us a thumbs up.
Every year you sponsor Hackfort, which is, for those of you who are not aware, Hackfort. This is a tech festival that brings the community together to share knowledge and skills with one another. Hackfort. 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 Hackfort.
What, like?
That wasn't as smooth as I was hoping for.
That's funny.
But we're ready. We are
Hey.
live.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Hackfort Live, our wonderful show about all things technology. We are, of course, joined tonight by someone I look up to and hold very dear, my dear brother, Jesse Wakeley, a digital hustler, living also on them interwebs with us. We're here to chat about some fun things tonight. So welcome to the show, Jesse. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Before we jumped on, I looked up the definition of nepotism just to see if this applied, and I just wanted to confirm that I am happy to report that I think this counts. So glad to be able to take advantage of that a little bit.
I was gonna say something.
My life.
I'm glad you did.
Yeah. So feels good to take advantage of that inside track.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Jesse, I mean, you're my brother. We grew up together, with technology. I just kind of want to get into it with you. I think my first question for you is, where does your love for technology come from? I mean, where do you think that really all started?
Yeah, good question. I think it probably really goes back to, and I know you remember a little bit about this, our father getting an Apple Macintosh computer in the mid 80s. He was kind of ahead of the curve on that. And I think it really started from just being fascinated by that machine. And like one of my earliest memories is I remember just being fascinated by the graphical user interface and being able to create folders, and then create folders in folders. And I remember just like making folders to put in folders to put in folders, and then hiding folders in the windows of the folders. And just finding really fascinating.
Yeah, like folder inception on a computer. It's like this infinite thing, right?
Right. Yeah, but that was a new concept. I mean, just that concept of being organizing stuff and being able to structure things in this digital, yet kind of a physical representation of that data was really fascinating. So I think it started just from that, really.
Yeah. I mean, and I have all sorts of memories of you and I, of course, playing little games on the Mac, and yeah, I mean, even as a little kid, just being glued to this little gray screen, this grayscale Mac screen. And then you always, though, I mean, I always looked up to you when I was little, because I feel like you really got into like, how do these programs work, and like how can I like I don't want to use the word hack, but maybe hack is the right word. You were always trying to find different ways to use the computer and mess it up in a way, right? Like
yeah,
your curiosity.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, and it's kind of funny, I feel like I was really late to the whole programming thing and like really hacking in that regard. But even without knowing kind of those skills or knowing what that was all about, still being able to, get in there and just poke around and just kind of see what you could find and what you could do. And yeah, trying to manipulate things in weird ways. It's and then like later on, I learned about like freaking culture with a PH, where people would, hack telephone systems, back when we had landlines and payphones and things like that. And, that was a big part of that whole, the initial hackers from the 80s and stuff. That was really the core of that, was just poking around just to see what was possible and just to discover new ground, and,
Yeah, I mean, from you, Jesse, I think it's interesting because I guess hacking was the right word, because a lot of people don't realize that hacking doesn't have to be just coding. And I feel like you've just always had this, this curiosity to kind of poke at the electronics. I mean, I do too, but I always saw you really kind of, when you bring up the phone thing, I have to ask, did your interest in the phone side of things come from the movie Hackers? Did you learn about that from the movie Hackers, maybe, or get a little inspired by the movie Hackers?
Probably a little inspired by that. I mean, that definitely was a big one.
Yeah.
Where I really got really fascinated though was when I was probably like 15 maybe or something. Neil Stephenson, who's known for fiction, he wrote a Cryptonomicon and what is it? There's a few other books that he's like really well known for. He wrote a book about hackers that was actually a non-fiction book that talked about the history of hackers in like the 80s. Snow Crash, that was another one. He's really known for Snow Crash, is maybe one of his known books. But yeah, so he actually wrote a non-fiction book about the early hackers in like the 80s, and also touched on a lot of phone freaking stuff. And I remember that was like really what really kind of opened my eyes at that point, and opened to the possibility. And that was, and that was in early days, like, when we were just starting to get the internet in Idaho, when that was starting to become a thing. But, this was talking about people prior to that would be connecting into phone lines or into corporate networks, things like that, before there even was, an internet, or at least there was an internet, but it wasn't very widespread.
Well, I mean, I guess it's great you brought up the internet, because that's kind of my next segue, Jesse, is like, I mean, you in a way kind of convinced our dad to get the internet, I feel like, a lot sooner than anyone I knew No one had the internet when, as far as my friends are concerned, how did you convince our dad to let us get internet back then? I mean, was he interested in it, or was it just kind of like, Dad, we should try doing this? Like,
well, initially what it was is I think, before there was internet access in North Idaho, before that was really a thing, America Online was kind of the big thing all over.
Yeah, right? You get free trials.
Right. So, like a lot of people of a certain age remember the free, the DVDs, the CDs.
The CDs, they were everywhere.
CD-ROMs that were everywhere for free, a free month trial. And I think it was even like 30 hours free of America Online. So, we had gotten those, and that was really it. Is I had convinced our parents, hey, look, we got this free trial to this online service. Yeah. Our computer came with a dial-up modem over the phone lines. Let's try this out. What they didn't realize, and that I probably didn't really have a full awareness of, was that the local number that you would connect to was actually in Washington, in Spokane.
Oh, so it was overseas. It was out of state.
It was out of state, and this is back when out of state calls cost a ton. It was free for the month, but then we had this massive phone bill.
Oh my God! I did not know that. That is hilarious.
Yeah. So I got a little flack for that, and it was like, okay, well, we're not doing this. And then we didn't have. So then we just had nothing for a while, and then a little bit after that time, they finally started to roll in. This internet provider called Networks came to Sandpoint, and I think they were kind of the initial one that I remembered. And even before having internet, they had a local BBS or bulletin board system. So you would dial up with your modem to connect to their system, to connect to the internet. But they also had just a local system that you could connect to. That was just like a private, kind of like an enclosed kind of thing that was like not a whole lot on there, kind of some message board kind of stuff. That you could get onto, and back then they used to have like the message board systems. How they would work is that you could subscribe to these different boards and post messages, and these different systems would periodically, like every day, they would call in to another system to update all of the messages. So you would send something to the bulletin board, and then you'd have to wait. Whatever you sent would get sent the next day, propagate around the country, and then eventually that would come back to be able to read it. So that was kind of cool. But what I was really into it was for the games.
Yeah.
Some of like the initial multiplayer games, they were called DOOR games, DOOR. I forget exactly what that stands for. But there were these multiplayer games that and because of how it worked, only like 3 people could connect at a time to this thing. So you could play with up to 3 people, but then it would be kind of turn-based. So you would spend so much time, and then you'd have to log in the next day. You would get more time to play, and then you could log on for your allotted hour or whatever it was. And then and then you have to log in the next day. So that was one of the things for a while, and then I think I don't know. Eventually, after doing that for a while, somehow we were able to convince to get the internet.
Well, and didn't Jesse? You ended up in high school working. When you were young, you ended up working for Povin, right? Ponderay Valley Network.
Right. Mm-hmm.
How did that job even come to you? Like, how did that work?
Right, and that's kind of interesting. So Ponderay Valley Networks is actually based out of Priest River, and they were kind of expanding, and they actually bought up Networks. The first internet provider that I was just talking about.
So they took over there. Yeah.
They got bought by this company, Ponderay Valley Networks, and then they were trying to restructure it because, the main headquarters was over in Washington. So I don't remember exactly how it went down, but somebody from this company actually came to the high school and asked whoever at the high school if there was anybody that might be capable and would have the knowledge to do tech support for this internet company. And I actually remember meeting with the guy. He came to Sandpoint High School, and I met with him in the auditorium. and sat with him in the seats in the auditorium. And he asked me a few questions for like 10 minutes. And he's like, all right, you want a job? And I'm like, yeah.
That's so cool. Was that Mr. Darling's referral then? Did like he say, "Oh, you should go to this"?
I'm guessing it must have been. I'm guessing he must have talked to Dave, Mr. Darling, who was the computer electronics teacher at the Sandpoint High School. Yeah, he must.
Which I think we've all had classes from Mr. Darling. You had Mr. Darling, right, Mike?
You
never took Mr. Darling?
You missed out.
It's a shame.
You missed
God bless him. He recently passed on.
Yes.
I would say, definitely one of the most inspirational teachers we had.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. So you did that, Jess, and you've always kind of just been, into that culture, and obviously you went on to school, and now you're a programmer. I'm really curious to talk to you today about, what you've been working on, about what you worked on in China. I think that's going to be really, really cool. We can go over that.
Sure.
Is there anything, that I guess the other question I have before we dig into that is just, music has also been a big part of your life. And I think you also are someone who got me into electronic music. And, what are your thoughts on like music and technology? I mean, what do you think that's a big deal in the industry, or, where do you land on the two pieces, right? Because they
yeah. Well, let's take it back even to, you were asking about, kind of interest in technology and in computers.
Yeah.
And and I was talking about just the fascination just with the platform, and just the system whatsoever. But even more so was, later on, once the internet started to become a thing, and once I started to, spend a little bit of time on it, and then just kind of realize the potential that was there, and just kind of realizing how that the capability of the internet to connect people everywhere and to remove the gatekeepers that block, information, that it could be so revolutionary, and we're kind of dealing with a lot of the negative consequences of that right now. But that was I remember having this realization, kind of like just from the little bit I know studying history, is that, in the past, you always have these gatekeepers that are kind of the guardians of the knowledge, right? It's like, first it was religion, and the churches, and only certain people were allowed to know how to read and write and to know the book, and that they really, through the Bible and whatever was being taught down, that they really controlled the flow of information. And then you move into monarchies, and different kind of government systems like that, where then they're controlling the flow. And then you have, then the printing press becomes a thing, but it's still a matter of who owns the printing press, who has access to those resources, to be able to control what gets passed around. And then all of a sudden, the internet appears, and then the whole world is available, at your fingertips.
Literally anyone can share anything they want on the internet. Well, at least initially.
Right. Yeah. Initially, but that was, I had this realization, at that point. And I think about it a lot, that I fear for the type of person I may have become if it wasn't for the internet becoming a thing at the time that it did, and at the time that I happened to be exposed of it. It's like having grown up in Idaho, out in the sticks. There was so much stuff, and I'm so grateful for so much stuff. Maybe it wasn't all good. Maybe I shouldn't have been exposed to all of it at the age I did, but still, just to open my eyes, to everything that's out there. So you talk about music, and I've always had a fascination with with music in general, but electronic music ties in with my fascination of electronics.
Yeah.
And like, for an example, I'm really big into drum and bass. I'm a big drum and bass head, and most Americans aren't very familiar with drum and bass. It's big in the UK, in the United Kingdom. It's like, it's pop music. Like, drum and bass songs go on the top 40 in the UK, but most people in the US, couldn't really distinguish, what that would be. It's just kind of a subgenre. But if it wasn't for the internet, there's probably no way I would be aware that such a thing existed, and that I'd be able to get in so deep, into that whole world, and just know the capability, just what's out there, and just different cultures, You know, it's like, that's how I know about, like, you know, sound system culture, which is a big thing in the UK and Jamaica and all these different social scenes. They're all around the world. If it wasn't for the internet, I would have had never known that all those things existed. And it, you know, I just would have missed out on all of that influence that I've had.
I mean, let alone, I mean, you were the one who showed me what a program called Napster was when we were in high school. And as much flack as, you know, Napster ended up on taking, arguably, it just like what it did for, you know, the internet did for access, it gave us a way to find new music we probably never would have found. Right. Electronic music being a big one. You know, I remember Mike and I listened to mix CDs that you made in high school. Remember Dune? We were obsessed with Happy Hardcore and Dune. I can't tell you when we were kids.
Are you ready to fly?
Yes. But we visited that one a little while ago, actually. It's kind of old stuff. Still all right. Yeah.
Well, that's you know, it's amazing that proliferation of ideas and sharing of music. You know, it changed the world, right? And obviously, the three of us we love technology for what it can do in a positive way. I'd say for the most part, you know, so cool.
Right. Yeah.
And Mike, what was the question I was going to ask you earlier about? Oh, I can't remember. Mike had a good music-related question, but it might come back to me.
Yeah, but I don't know. It's, you know, it's like the internet has definitely blown apart the whole music industry in so many ways. And that was another thing. I remember I actually did my senior thesis in high school on the impact and the effects of electronic music on culture.
Oh wow.
Was actually my senior thesis. And I remember at that point, and I guess maybe that's part of why I was fascinated with it, but I remember, like, in my research, drum and bass was the newest musical genre in the world at that time.
Interesting.
In the early
I remember when you were doing a lot of that, you know, you were really into the electronic music, and wasn't jungle kind of what started drum and bass, or that genre kind of evolved into drum and bass?
Yeah, and that goes back to like the 90s, you know, early 90s. And that's another thing I find really fascinating that I wouldn't know without the internet, probably, you know. It's just like the history of how those things evolved. You know, jungle came out of break beats or hardcore, which kind of came out of the acid house movement in like the 80s, you know, and that's just like a whole rabbit hole you can go down. And then it's been all this cross, you know, since then though, and thanks to the internet, there's been all of this cross hybridization between all these different genres and different styles.
Well, I was telling you, I've been listening. Joe Lambert and I started listening to psytrance a lot, or psytrance, and like, you know, that's like it's some drum and bass, but it's got this own kind of tempo on its own, you know, and it's like,
certain
again,
yeah.
Jesse, what was the name of that break? That's the famous break that kind of drum and bass kind of is from in a way.
The Amen.
Amen break. Yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother rabbit hole, but it's so interesting that like that break is just in everything, and it's like the basis for
Right. Yeah, it was the Winstons. Amen Brother. It was actually the B-side to a single they released. But yeah, that's a really fascinating story, just that there is this one little drum loop from this little drum break on this one record that kind of led to the birth of a whole genre of music. It's kind of a crazy thing, you know.
And they didn't get any royalties for that, right?
Yeah, that's a really sad part. They didn't get any royalties from it.
Jeez.
Yeah. But that's interesting. So that's like another interesting thing, you know, technology is like when those guys were starting in the 90s, you know, like it was the equipment costs, you know, like the investment you had to make to do music, period, you know, if you wanted to record or anything, it cost a fortune. But then these guys had to buy their own hardware or rent hardware. A lot of times you would rent a studio just to get access to the actual musical hardware that they had, you know, synths and samplers and stuff like that. And back in the day, you know, these guys would make these tracks on their hardware. They would use Ataris. Ataris were actually really big for like MIDI recording and stuff. And then they would like record, you know, on tape or something like that. And then they would have these cutting houses in the UK. That was a big thing. So a producer would make a track. And then in order to get it out to DJs, on a Friday, like Thursday, I think it was like Friday morning, the DJs would go to these cutting houses with whatever you wanted to get with, and you'd go there to get whatever you wanted to get cut, and then you would have to get in line, and then they would actually physically make the record for you of whatever you wanted. So they would go, and that's where they called them dub plates, and it was like different from vinyl. It's actually an acetate record that actually degrades after you play it, after a few plays. So they might only be good for like 50 plays, but they're cheaper, and you can just cut them instead of having to do like a press. So these DJs would have to go and get in line so that you could get the freshest new tracks cut in order to then be able to play them that weekend.
Then you would play them back then. I mean, this is before laptops and MP3s and the way, and all that, where you could actually, wow. So you would get a dub to play that night, and it might, it plays that's it. Like you play it that weekend, and that record's toast or whatever.
You could get a few plays,
Yeah,
and it would still work. It would just degrade. The sound quality would just get worse and worse.
It's not as strong as a vinyl press.
Is that where lo-fi came from?
Quite possibly. That effect. Yeah, as opposed to now, where it's like a producer can make a track on their computer, upload it to SoundCloud, and then millions of people can download it within seconds.
Yeah. No, and I think that's an interesting thing too in our modern culture is kind of like, it's kind of the indie, the hipster way, but it's like finding new music is kind of hard, or like discovering new music that a lot of people haven't discovered. I mean, there's lots of stuff out there, right? But there's also a lot of people on the internet.
Right. Well, that's part of the reckoning that we're dealing with in like the music industry, is that it has opened everything up to where like anybody has an equal chance of being exposed, to an audience. But on the flip side, anybody has a chance of being exposed to an audience. So it's like really difficult to really rise above, rise above and to actually stand out is a much harder thing.
Your cousins did it somehow.
Yeah,
they did, but it wasn't easy.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it's doable. And I actually think it's like, if you are consistent and you work at it, I think there's a better chance, artists have a better chance of success today than ever, at least as far as like to have like kind of a middle class, kind of income standard of living. Like it's a grind, but it's totally capable. It's possible. There was an article that actually just came out in Music Alley, I don't know how they pronounce it, musicalley.com. It's kind of a music industry site. They just had a article came out today saying 1% of artists account for 90% of streams online, which is kind of interesting.
Wow.
But I was reading this. There's this guy Bob Lefsetz, he's kind of big in the music, kind of a weirdo, but he's big in the very influential in the music industry. He's a lawyer, but he has a blog and he posts article, and he was just saying how the devil is in the details. Though 1% actually represents 16,000 artists. So that's like 16,000 artists that are representing, that represent 90% of the stream. So that's like a pretty good chunk of people that are actually, have found a way.
Yeah, 16,000 out of, I mean, that's a lot, right? I mean,
that's a lot. I mean, but I mean, that's a good chunk. And then especially when you just keep in mind that there are millions of people are trying. So it's like, it's a lot of people are trying, but it's supply and demand, right? It's like a lot of the stuff, like, people only have so much attention span, and there's only so much time to listen to stuff out there. So it's like, if you can find an audience, and if you're consistent, that's the biggest thing. I think a lot of people is you just have to be consistent and and communicate with your fans. And that's the biggest thing too, is that like people, everybody has their people that they're like really into. And it makes it, now artists can connect and interact with their fans on a closer level than they ever have been able to before. And those that are able to figure out how to do that and are very consistent about it, I think really reap the rewards, and are able to have a successful career. But if you're hoping to just, make your CD, you release your one CD a year, and you did your big release, and then you're just going to coast off the sales of that, for the next year, forget about it. That's not work. That doesn't work anymore.
Well, I mean, I would say, like our cousins, Jesse, are probably the busiest people I know. I mean, those guys are never not recording, working, releasing a thing, doing it. Even with COVID, I didn't see it slow them down much. They just flipped their engagement to online. They just did a virtual concert last week, and they're still recording. You got to just do it.
Yeah. Keep getting out there. Yeah. I think it's a good time for that too. I'm kind of looking forward to seeing, I'm guessing with all this time that a lot of artists have had, I'm guessing that there's going to be a lot of really good material that's going to come out, especially just with just all the emotions, that are going on.
There's a lot going on. I mean, you're in Portland. You guys are on fire right now. I mean,
Actually, as long as we're talking about that, I actually meant to do this earlier. I'm going to turn my camera around to see if you guys can kind of see the haze out here. I don't know.
It's just white, white and smoky.
Yeah. It's pretty. I don't think the camera is really doing it justice. But,
someone posted a video in our group chat that was it was literally San Francisco yesterday, and it was drone footage, and they played it to the Blade Runner theme. Yeah, and it just looked like Blade Runner. I was like, oh, I guess we're here now. But it's a lot sooner, I guess.
So interesting aside about that. I actually saw somebody actually took a picture of San Francisco yesterday and put it next to a picture, a screenshot from Blade Runner 2049. And the color of the sky is the exact same. Chris Anderson of Wired, he tweeted about it and he said, this is really testament to whoever the director was of it, the research he did, because the Pantone color of the sky totally matches low-hanging smoke.
That's so crazy, man.
It's unbelievable.
Man, it's so crazy.
I saw that clip too with the soundtrack, Blade Runner music. It's eerie. It's pretty scary.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I might need to think about becoming a Blade Runner here pretty soon. Hunting androids sounds like it might be a new thing going into 2021.
Yeah.
But everything else that's happened, I won't be surprised if we just announce tomorrow that there are cyborgs among us and we need to catch them.
I wouldn't put it past them.
So yeah, Jesse, I mean, so we talked about, your love of music and, you've always been into code, you got into programming, and so now, you've talked to me the last few months about a project you've been working on that's kind of combining, I think, kind of your love for tech and also the ability to maybe share music. I mean, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the two things I am passionate about the most, I find the most interesting, are music and technology. So, I've spent a lot of time, kind of at the synergy of those two. I like we've talked about electronic music. I do like to DJ, stuff like that. But then also, more on the other side of actually trying to figure out how technology, can be incorporated and affect music. So one thing I've been kind of working on for a bit is to try to figure out smaller devices that can interact and to record and manipulate audio and things like that. I have kind of notions, ideas about smaller kind of devices to be used for live streaming, especially this year when live streaming has become such a big thing and necessary for artists to do. I think a lot of people are kind of warming up to that prospect, but right now it's still pretty awkward. You definitely need kind of a computer setup and, some pretty significant hardware to really do it. But, just like we were talking about how technology has affected music and distribution and things like that, and everything just keeps getting cheaper and faster, I figured that we've kind of reached this point where, because of smartphones and things like that, that the costs to build electronics is kind of dropping lower and lower all the time. Yeah. So that now it might be more feasible to kind of design smaller devices that can be cheap yet powerful enough to do live streaming of audio. So, it's something I've been thinking about for a few years, and I've done a little bit of research on, but I'm a software guy, really.
Yeah.
That's kind of my background. So I really don't know much about hardware, but it's something I definitely, with the Internet of Things kind of becoming a buzz phrase, and kind of becoming more realistic, I'm definitely more interested in those kind of, in that whole realm of technology. So I've been doing some research and kind of sleuthing around on the internet for a while. And it's been like a year and a half ago, I actually found this guy, some guy from India, some hardware engineer in India had actually released an open source hardware spec. So, an ideal, people that don't know what open source is, it's if a computer program, generally that it's almost always that it's free, and that the source code, so the code that is actually written to write the program, is fully open, so that anybody can take a look at the code, modify it to their needs, suggest changes that might make it better, things like that. But we're starting to get to that point where that same paradigm is getting switched over to hardware as well. So I found this guy who had actually created this hardware device that actually connects. It's actually an add-on for a Raspberry Pi, which I actually happen to have right here on the table.
Yeah, and Jesse, for anyone who doesn't know what's a Raspberry Pi for anybody who doesn't know what that is?
Yeah, so this is essentially a full computer. Again, talking about economies of scale and just with the prices of technology dropping down more and more. This right here, it's about, the size of like a card in your wallet.
Credit card, yeah.
A little thicker, but it's a fully functioning computer. It has a processor right there. It has like USB ports like you would expect, Ethernet, plug it into a network, HDMI, so you can plug it into your TV, and actually has an audio output, kind of like a headphone jack, but it's an output, and I'm kind of interested in inputs. So these are like $35, and it's a fully functional computer.
Yeah,
essentially.
Very popular. I mean, that's a pretty amazing piece of tech that I would say. One of the Pis probably came out like, what, 9 years ago?
Yeah, I think so.
And they've kept revisioning them. I mean, the newest one's like more power, like 10 times more powerful than the Apollo, mission. And it's like, they're cheap. I think it's the biggest thing too, is for what it can do, it's a very cheap computer, right? Gives people access to something that they can modify.
Yeah, and it was originally designed for education in mind. It was really meant to be a device to kind of teach computer, electronics, hardware kind of stuff. But it's really been a big thing for the developer community and hobbyists to kind of create add-ons for it. And that's one of the cool things about it, is that you can see there's this line of these pins right here. And this is what they call the GPIO, general purpose input output. So you can essentially write a computer program, and if you know what you're doing, which I don't really yet, but I'm trying to figure it out, you can actually program and control what goes in and out of these pins. So then you can stack different add-on devices on top of it that will then communicate with the Raspberry Pi.
Super cool.
So that's what this guy ended up doing. This guy in India ended up creating this open source design to add on a hat for here that adds audio inputs as well as additional audio outputs. So then you can record with the Raspberry Pi or do anything with it.
Wow.
So I kind of poked around on that for a little bit, but the documentation that he posted, it said, it had these easy step-by-step instructions, that said, step 1, order the BOM. I'm like, okay, BOM.
What's a BOM? You got to Google that.
Yeah. Step 2, send the Gerber files to your nearest fab house. And then I'm like, okay. And then step 3, assemble the board. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, well, cool. If I knew what I was doing, that's great. So, so it did. Yeah. So took some research, I was like, okay, BOM. Turns out that's, what is that? It's a board. It's a bill of materials.
Oh, okay. A BOM. Yeah. Just like I do those all the time in sales, but I didn't think about it in the context of building a board.
So a BOM is just bill of materials.
Yeah.
And it's actually a list of, so essentially it's all of the parts that are required to build this board. And then the Gerber files I found out. So that's kind of, essentially that's like, it's like a CAD file, but it's meant for kind of like a 3D image, essentially, for actually designing the hardware boards. And it turns out that that's actually what these fab house, which, okay, what is that? Fabrication house. So these companies, these buildings that actually manufacture circuit boards and things for that, for other companies. So I did a bit of research and kind of figured that stuff out, and eventually, decided that I wanted to that I wasn't going to be able to build one of these things, but maybe I could have one of these fab houses build it for me. So I did a bit of research and found, there's a handful of companies in China, go figure, that will allow you to just send them the files. You can just upload these files, spreadsheet with all the parts, and then these Gerber files that have the actual format. And then they have systems, these big hardware systems that can then actually print the circuit boards based on those files. So I went ahead and found this company. There's a bunch out there.
I'm guessing they were probably in like Shenzhen or something,
Yeah.
China.
So I got right here. So PCB Way actually is the company I ended up using, primarily because they were one of the only ones that were like fairly cheap to just get one made.
Well, and I think that's an interesting part too, Jesse, is the fact that you can cheaply get this made at this point too, like a prototype, right? I would say even 10, 15 years ago, it would cost you probably a few $1,000s to do something like this.
Exactly.
But you go overseas to China, they're like, we make boards all day. We have machines that can just make a circuit board, and then we can solder all the parts in. You're good to go. And I think that's a big change, where you can prototype something as a maker or someone who has an idea pretty cost effectively. I think it's a giant change in how we do stuff.
Yeah, and these guys were the only ones that were nearly this cheap for just one, but it cost me it was $156 to make the one thing. And as an aside too, I'll say, what's the there's actually a guy on YouTube has a series, Smarter Every Day.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No.
You guys are probably familiar with.
Oh, we've been in contact with him. We've been dying to get him to Hackfort.
Yeah, he's awesome. So he actually went to Shenzhen and
that's where he lives. Yeah.
And he went to there you go. But he actually went to this company and actually did a tour.
He did a video on that company specifically. I didn't know that.
It's this actual company.
I might have watched that video then. That's interesting.
It's really cool. So he actually walks through the whole process and actually shows, how they do it. They have these big machines for doing more volume, but then they do have, for doing smaller orders, they do have people lined up on a table that, will go through the process and kind of, they have machines that still help, but then like someone by hand will kind of go and, tweak the device and stuff and, get it all fixed down. I decided in January that I was going to do this and send an order to this company, and got an email back saying, actually had some correspondence back and forth with this woman that worked for them. That was kind of fun, but then she informed me that they were having to slow down production because of this virus that was going around.
I wonder what virus they were talking about.
Yeah. So they kind of slowed things down for a while, and that was right before the COVID hit over in the U.S. So kind of interesting. I was messaging her saying, "Hey, stay safe over there. I hear it's pretty bad." And then the next month, she's messaging me saying, "Hey, stay safe over there. I hear it's pretty bad." Jeez. So it ended up getting delayed a little bit, but eventually, I actually got delivered to me this little board right here, which is so based on just a couple files that I uploaded to them.
Wow.
They were able to figure out, where all this stuff kind of went on, all these little parts, and soldered them all together for me and sent it my way. So yeah, essentially what it is it's this like audio. There's a small little chip in the middle that's a audio controller, audio input output kind of thing. It's actually made by Texas Instruments, a little microprocessor, and then it has a couple audio outputs and then a couple audio inputs as well.
Oh, okay.
I also, while I was at it, since I was going to the trouble, I thought these are kind of cool. I also had them just make me a few other kind of blanks. Yeah,
so if you wanted to, you could solder in the parts that it needs, essentially.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I figured I'd have them make the one just as kind of a little prototype. But then if I wanted to get the parts, I could, in theory, try to make my own. Although, I definitely have not gotten to that yet.
Wow.
Yeah, and this is it's a surface mount soldering, which generally you have like an oven. Actually, like an oven that they go into, which I don't really have. I'm thinking that
there's ways to get it. You can do it in your oven.
Yeah, you have an oven.
Jury rig a toaster oven,
Yeah. There's some homebrew ways to do that for sure.
Exactly, yeah. So
you could,
so that's on the list. Unfortunately, I have not had success actually getting this thing working yet.
Yeah.
Since I got back, and I've actually and this is another just we're talking about the wonder of the internet.
Yeah.
I've been emailing back and forth with this guy in India, some hardware engineer in India. I've never met the guy. I don't know anything about the guy really. I actually just found his email address by going through the source code that he wrote for me. He left his email address in the comments.
So I think he figured out if you're nerdy enough, you're going to dig into the source code. Then I'll give you my email. You know.
So I've been emailing with this guy. We've been going back and forth for a while. Trying to figure it out. Not a ton. I try not to bother him too much. I did find out that he had. I had a Raspberry Pi 2 since they have different models. Turns out he developed his on a Raspberry Pi 3. So that was maybe part of the issue. I just recently, last week, bought a Raspberry Pi 3, hoping it would magically just work. But it hasn't yet. I haven't figured that out yet. So it's a work in progress. But it has been a really interesting experience.
Kind of getting amazing to me that you can do that. I just think, talking about, even you talking about how artists right now, if you really want to make it, you can. I think if you are really inspired to build something with hardware and software, if you can do it. There's not the money restrictions. That bar is so much lower than it's ever been to learn how to code, to learn how hardware works, and to maybe prototype something. I think that is an amazing thing that's available.
And like you were saying, like the gates are open now. Like there's no gatekeepers to all these subject matter experts and free hardware like specs that you can just use. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's wild. And I think we're just starting to get that point with hardware.
Yeah.
It's been that way with software for a while. It's like, back in the day, if you wanted to start a tech company, you want to start an internet company, it's like, okay, well, you need the resources to buy servers and set them up and have the proper networking and have someone that knows how to run them, and nowadays anybody can open an account with Amazon Web Services, and you can have the exact same computer processing resources that Amazon has.
It's not. Yeah, I mean, it's at this point, it's like equalized. I mean, who's going to be better? Google, Amazon, Microsoft. Right. If you buy web services from them, it's like.
People. It's just a matter of just stepping up and just having the patience and the discipline and the effort to just figure the stuff out. And we're starting to get there with hardware. It's like I didn't realize this at first. I was like, well, can I? Are there companies where I can just send them these files and they'll just figure it out? And it turned out there is. It's a lot harder, finding resources for how to do this stuff. We're not quite there yet. That's like I always used to tell people. I taught a class on running a business online for Lane Community College outside of Eugene for a while. And, something I told them is that the awesome thing about working on the internet is that people that build the internet are also all on the internet. So, they're all there talking about how they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
So it's all out there and everyone's, down to post this stuff. We're not quite there with hardware yet. Like the hardware info, it's a little more contained, it's still a little more siloed.
Yeah, you still have to have the factory to make the thing, right? Or to make the economy of scale work. Like for your little PCB, that company, I'm sure they make tens of thousands of boards, right? I mean, they pump them out to get that economy of scale to a point where they can afford to prototype a board for $150.
Right.
But who's to say we're not going to have soon, new 3D printers that can maybe print the circuit board for you, that can do the PCB and the metal, who knows,
Right. Well, and I think, it's like those machines are out there, but again, it's just a matter of how much do they cost, are we at that point yet? And yeah, it's not the kind of thing that any other person can afford to have right now, but, give it another 10 years, these things are going to keep trending downward, it's like we're starting to cap out Moore's law, but, we're not quite there yet. They're figuring out ways around it to keep everything getting more and more efficient and cheaper. So, I think that's going to be a big thing. I think this next decade, we're going to start seeing a lot more hardware hackers, now that people have mobile has kind of plateaued. I hate to say it. I'm still trying to get into mobile programming, but it's like reality is that it's kind of plateaued. It's a mature kind of market now. So, I think a lot more interest is going to start moving. And the cool thing about that too is that that's really a byproduct of the mobile revolution. Is that it's because, that we have all these companies that are making mobile phones, it's created this demand for modular, smaller components.
Mm-hmm.
So
totally,
the side effect of the fact that there's so many companies, again, talking economies of scale, so many companies making so many parts for so many different mobile phones that now we all get to benefit from that. And that now the price is getting cheaper.
I think that's why VR was able to get to where it is now too. Like the
Right.
first couple VR, like you just use your cell phone, like you strap it into this thing.
Even the first Oculus literally had, I think, Samsung phone displays, OLED displays inside the, and that off-the-shelf parts from China,
I actually remember reading that was it Palmer Luckey? Was that the guy's name? The Oculus guy? That was actually his epiphany, was that he realized
I can get all these parts.
He realized he's like, there are all these parts available now, so I should be able to figure out a way, and they're getting cheap enough that I could maybe just do this on my own.
Yeah. He basically did. I mean, it was like a Kickstarter, and then it blew up, and then Facebook bought him. So
right. No, he was totally on head of the curve right there, and that's exactly why that happened. Was as another side effect of the mobile revolution. So I think that's a good example, and I think over the next few years we're just going to start seeing a lot more.
People are gonna go, wait a minute, I think I could build this,
Yeah. And that's the thing too, it's just like as more people keep digging in, and the rough edges will just keep getting sanded out, and it's just like it's like the same as programming computers doing software. It's like back in the day, you had to write assembly code or, God forbid, binary to actually program a computer. But there's been so many layers, programming languages that have been built on top of that foundation that now you don't have to worry. They take care of so much of the legwork for you underneath that, it makes it a lot easier to be productive and to make something, efficiently. And I think we're going to keep kind of reaching that same point with hardware as well, to some extent.
Yeah, that's an amazing, thought, Jesse. I hadn't really thought about just the fact that, we're hardware is kind of the next thing that's going to help us kind of push ideas forward, not just software, not just the internet.
Yeah. It seems like the big ones, these days that I see are, hardware, biotech, now that technology is getting smaller and we start figuring out how that interacts with biology and being able to program biology, and then the good old blockchain and, Bitcoin and, cryptocurrency. Seems like there's a lot of, we're going to see a lot of, hopefully a lot of kind of innovation in that world in the next few years as well.
Yeah, I really hope to see more just the blockchain technology kind of evolve. I feel like it's kind of stuck where it is, and it needs some smart idea to kind of push it to the next level.
Yeah. It's kind of in a lull. It needs to. Yeah, that killer app hasn't quite yet been found.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot of stuff bubbling under the surface, but not really anything that's quite grabbed the public's imagination yet. Other than Bitcoin might be worth a lot of money, so let's.
Let's not talk about that though. Let's not talk about like the 3 people that own like 70% of all Bitcoin.
Yeah. No, I got
right.
I don't find that all that interesting. I think there's the implications out beyond that. With just blockchain and being able to have trustless networks where you can totally trust on the computer system to tell you the truth, stuff like that. I think that's going to be way more profound over the next decade.
And smart contracts, like that's genius.
Exactly. Stuff like that. Yeah. We're talking about like removing the middleman, right? And that's as happened with the internet and stuff, and that's a perfect example of that, is being able to remove having to have some mediator in between a contract. It's kind of
disrupt so many industries.
Oh, that's huge. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right.
Yeah, take out the middleman. That's huge.
Yeah. So
I can't tell you how many of those there are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and usually they don't add a whole lot of value.
No.
Yeah.
That's the thing too. They're just kind of there.
They say they do.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Do they really? I don't know.
Well, awesome. No, Jesse, that was great, man. I really appreciate your insight and just your little journey you've been going through. It's always been fun. I always love chatting with you about these topics. I mean, I guess we do that a lot. So I was like, Mike, we should just have Jesse on to Hackfort Live this week. He's always working on something cool.
I just want to make it a public conversation instead of private for a change.
Mike, do you have any other questions for Jesse?
Gosh, there's a lot. I didn't know you taught about an online business, running an online business.
Yeah, I taught. So my first job, after I graduated, and I worked for this web design firm in Springfield, and my boss actually got hired. It was the community college, the community college's business development center, and he taught just like an evening course, and it was really just meant for people that ran businesses and just wanted to learn how to. It was Make Your Mark Online was the name of the course, and he'd been doing that for a few years and decided he didn't really want to do it anymore. And he asked me, he's like, "Hey, do you want to take over this course for me? Like, I've already written up a whole curriculum." He goes, "I'll just give it to you if you want to teach the course." So he just kind of gave me the job. But for a couple years, I was an instructor for a community college, and I taught I think it was like an 8-week course on just like running a business online.
Wow.
Just talking about like building a website, considerations for a website, and internet marketing and how to do search engine optimization and paid ads if you wanted to do that, stuff like that. Yeah, it was pretty fun.
Oh, that's cool.
It was a fun little course. Yeah.
I'm sure there were some good laughs in that course. I knowing you, that was probably good.
Yeah, I think I did okay.
Yeah.
Except then there was one year that they just didn't ask me back.
Oh,
I never heard
that last year.
Yeah. And they were done with it. I think they kind of canceled that, decided not to do that program anymore.
Oh, okay. But I guess the times have changed.
Yeah. It was fun. It was fun while it lasted. I never thought I'd get to be instructor for a community college. So yeah.
Add that to your resume,
Exactly. Yeah. One more.
Well, awesome, Jesse. Well, dude, I really appreciate you joining us tonight. Always a pleasure. We definitely look forward to having you at Shreveport and Hackfort when it does happen again.
Looking forward to being there.
September 21. Yeah, who knows? You might have your project might be a little more along. Maybe we'll have you on the stage at that point. You know.
I'm hoping so. That's a good. Good motivation for me to get on.
Yeah.
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 You can debut it.
Yeah. Yeah. Be cool.
Yeah. I actually remember at Hackfort a few years back, there was some guy who made some kind of like music events app.
Okay. Yeah.
And he was promoting it. I don't know if anything ever came of it, but yeah, he was trying to make kind of this like music event kind of calendar communication kind of app. And I actually remember watching him and being like, man, someday maybe I could promote something like that up there.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. You know, we have a whole industry event now that's kind of around just the music industry too. And so,
cool.
when you're ready, it's like a great networking opportunity, and maybe your idea will, come across some cool people in the industry's eyes, and that's what it's all about, man. It's all about bringing our communities together and having fun. So,
all right, let's plan on it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Sweet.
Well, awesome. Well, thanks, Jesse.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Mike. I don't know if you want to bring us off or chime us out.
Yeah, let's try to be fancy here. I'm just gonna play Magic Sword, and I don't know.
Always a good call. Always a good call. Sweet.
Yeah. Righty. Oh.
Yeah, it's been fun.
All right, we're done.